So you were wanting to know how much it cost?
No, you don't have to tell me. But I'm like, if you paid $300 for it, I hope you didn't pay $300 for it.
I
hope you got a coupon or something. I love it. Just FYI, I love it. I do love it.
I didn't pay the same amount of dollars as there were Spartan soldiers. I'll just put it that way.
Okay. All right.
Let's just say that I did spend somewhere between the amount of Spartan soldiers as the movie progressed, and there were less of them. So some point in the movie.
Spartan soldier?
Hello, and welcome to the show with no name. My name is Daniel, a.k.a. Daniel, and his name is Brendan, but most people call him B, like the buzz you hear in nature when you're taking a whiff of those delicious flowers. I don't know why I said delicious, but that's just kind of the picture of mine in my head when I think of smelling flowers. Well, Brendan, I have a question for you. And this kind of surrounds around the whole concept and the idea behind this show. Now, I've said this before. I've mentioned this a few times of how much I enjoy doing this show with you. It's a lot of fun. We had talked about doing something creative for many, many years. I mean, literally years. I don't know how long was it. Maybe like at least 5 or 6 years we had talked about doing something.
Yeah, it's got to be at least 6 because I've been living here for 6. And we talked about doing something at least for 1 or 2 while I was down there.
So it's even longer than I may think about it. It's like 8 years long or something like that. And I know we've mentioned this on the show before. We talked about maybe doing filming. We talked about doing writing. I know you do some writing on your own, but never really the idea of a podcast. And that kind of came up later after you did your first podcast, which was a show specifically surrounded around the idea of soccer, or that sounds so watered down because it's more than that, but that's essentially what it was. It was a show about soccer,
right,
or
exactly,
as most of the world would call it, football.
Right,
so
exactly.
That being said, you had a wonderful name for that. You called it the Beautiful Show. Correct? Am I right?
That's right. Yes,
so you
exactly
call it the
right.
Beautiful Show because people call football the beautiful game, which I will never understand because I look at it and I'm like, there's 11 dudes that are whining. They're like, oh, my shin! Did you not see him tank bust through my shin? There's blood everywhere. Anyway, that's me. That's me being an over-exaggerating football player. Anyway, I don't necessarily call it the beautiful game, but other people call it the beautiful game, and that was a very perfectly coincided name for the show, The Beautiful Show. Well, here on our show, we have one of the most ridiculous names ever. The name of this show is The Show with No Name. And I was having a conversation a few weeks back with my girlfriend, and she doesn't take too much of an interest to some of the creative outlets that I have. Not to say that she's not interested in, she just doesn't have time to really look into all of them, and I do a lot. We've talked about this before. I play in a band, I make videos on the side, and I also do this podcast. There's a couple of other things that I do as well, so she keeps up with most of them, but not all of them. And when we were talking about this show in particular, I remember the first time that we talked about it, she asked me, well, what's the name of your show? And I said, well, it's The Show with No Name. She's like, well, what's the name of the show? It's The Show with No Name. She's like, well, that's not a name. You need a name for a show. And so it reminded me of some of the conversations that we had before when we actually came up with the name for the show, which we both landed on this one, and we thought it was a great name, and we love it, and I still love it to this day. However, question for you today. If we had to rename the show, what are some names or some possible things that you think would best describe or coincide perfectly with what we talk about here at The Show with No Name?
Perfect, great. I figured that's where this was going when you were talking about it, but that's a good question. When you came up with the name for this show, right? And we were on the phone talking, well, what are we going to call it? And we were thinking about what we were going to call it before we even knew what we were going to talk about.
That's true. We didn't have a topic. We didn't have a topic for discussion. I remember, I think we said at one point, we said movies, like we were going to do like movie reviews.
Yeah, we were going to
do something like that. Which
do that.
It's funny.
We were just going to review the trailers, not the whole movies. That's right.
I still think we can do that. I still think we need to throw that into an episode at one point. We'll be like, okay, hey, pause, go watch this trailer real quick, come back, and here's our review on that trailer.
Yeah, not talking over it as it's playing, but exactly reviewing it. When I have to describe the show to people, and they say, well, what's your podcast about? I say, it's the Seinfeld episode show of podcasts. Because the Seinfeld show was about, like, they go, what's the show about, right? It's a show about nothing, right? And it was just every week was something completely different. Now, to some degree, it was a sitcom, but the show it didn't really have a direction other than it was comedy, and each week something quote-unquote zany happened to somebody. And so with our show, there's no overall theme. Right? You had written down something to the effect of, hey, it's basically, imagine the conversation that two guys would have at a diner eating waffles or something like that.
Exactly.
And that's exactly what this is. It is, and it evolved into not that we never intended it to evolve into this, not that we don't like that it did this, but
How do you know I don't hate it? I'm over here sitting in every episode I'm listening. I'm like, oh man, this is total crap. Why are we doing this?
It evolved into alternating hosts, and the topics are different every week. It's like you don't know, right? When you bring this up, I don't know what you're going to say until you actually start recording the show. Now, we record beforehand, but once you say hello, welcome, no idea what you're going to say until then.
Exactly. No, and it's that formula that I think has actually worked out really well for us, because it allows the opportunity for a conversation that fits kind of more perfectly with that description that I gave before, the idea of a diner. When you go out to sit at a diner, or if you think about, well, I mean, it doesn't really happen nowadays. Who sits at a diner anymore? I mean,
people still do.
That's true.
You know what? Last year, a blind date at a diner, so people still do.
Okay, all right. I was going to say, I'm saying this, there might be somebody sitting in a diner right now listening to this and like, these sons of guns are really going to, like, right. I work a 12-hour shift so I can sit at this diner and drink coffee, all right? And I do remember there were days back in when you and I were going to the same home church that we went to diners to play dominoes. I remember that.
Yeah, that's true.
We used to go to gyms. If you're from the United States, you might be familiar with gyms. I want to say they're everywhere, but I don't know. That might just be a Southern. Are there gyms where you're at? No, this is all Southern. Oh,
yeah. It's owned by. I believe his first name actually is Jim. His last name is like Haslucker or something like that.
Okay.
He might be passed away, but
I'm pretty sure he has to be. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I'm learning more about my city. Thanks for sharing more about my city. Every day I learn I learn a little bit more about my city. But if you imagine, put yourself in a time capsule. Well, not a time capsule necessarily. How about a time machine? Don't put yourself in a time. That's for future. Like, just put yourself in a time capsule. In 20 years, you just like pop out. You're like, oh, here I am. It's 20 years later.
So, like, did I age during those 20 years? Or
Wouldn't that be awesome if you could just sit in a time capsule and just not age? Well, I don't know if that'd be.
I think that'd be horrible, because then you come out and like your children are older. Your friends possibly are dead. Your wife's older. Your husband's
you wouldn't
older.
know, and you wouldn't know anything either.
Yeah, and like you would technology would have, and you're sitting there going, how do I unlock my door? Where's my house?
How do I unlock my door? Well, you take a nose hair out. That's the only way that we were able to be secure
DNA
in the future. Only nose hairs. DNA straight from nose hairs. You got to pluck one every time. It's a painful experience, but at least you're safe at night. You know that no one can get into your house. That being said, what I meant to say was put yourself in a time machine. Go back to the day and age when people used to sit around in diners and have conversations, and it seemed like that was like the social hang place. You could have two people that would meet for lunch during work or something like that, and they would sit down and they'd have a conversation, and they would just talk about, really whatever. And the problem with today's topics and news conversations and people going over the problem with podcasts, really, and I don't know, I shouldn't say this because I don't listen to that many podcasts, but I feel like most people focus on a lot of the topics that are pessimistic, or they surround around the idea of hate. They surround around the idea of the world is in a pretty sad state is what I'm trying to say. And a lot of people talk about those types of things. And I just didn't feel like that should be us, because there's so many other things that you could talk about that could just brighten somebody's day. And it reminded me of just, hey, I'm at a diner. Let's get a milkshake. Here's a pizza or a burger. Let's sit down. Hey, man, let's talk about ping pong balls and why they're so flammable. Like, that's a conversation that people should be having in diners, you know? That's a conversation people should be having just on a day-to-day basis, just a conversation to smile. And so I feel like that's something that we've been able to accomplish with this show in particular.
Agreed. I actually was going to kind of go in that direction a little bit before I actually answered your first question. Because we are, like you were saying, a lot of podcasts, there's no theme to goes to. Like, it's not like we talk about soccer or we talk about politics or we talk about cars or auto mechanics, right? So it's not like somebody who's like, I'm looking for a podcast or a show that's about video gaming or some sort of, right? They'll never find us because we're not under genre X, because we don't have that. But one of the things that I like about the show, and if I could toot our own horn for a second here, just slightly, if I wanted to learn how to date, I would listen to this podcast, because every episode we start the episode with either some little vignette story, or we start it with the totally, I don't want to say totally off the wall question like, hey, if you were underwear, what color underwear would you be? Right? Nothing like that. But we do have something that is kind of like comes out of left field or is a curveball. And so you're sitting down here with your date and you want to get to know him or her, then you say to them something to the effect of, hey, if you had a Kickstarter, what would you kickstart? And you can learn about them by what they would kickstart. So this is what I think. So people are learning about us. So it's not as if people can really search for like, hey, I want a podcast of just two guys talking about stuff. How do you find that? There's no metrics that are really going to measure that, other than if we mark it as two males and they talk. Topic rotates.
But so based off of what you're saying that we would be a perfect show for dating couples, or better yet, people who want to get better on dates. Is what you're saying.
Who want to get better on dates, because so I'm in the DC area. So two of the questions that people like, what?
I'm just thinking. I'm just thinking we change the name to the show with no dates, because we're two single dudes who can't get any dates. It's like we were just spending the whole time learning how to answer our own questions, that we're not actually going out and answering questions for other people.
We can get dates.
It was a joke. I'm being. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
In the DC area, two of the questions that are like asked 90, 95, 100% of the time when people first meet are, where are you from? Because this is such a transient city, right? People are from all over.
It's a melting pot.
Not just the United States, but all over the world to come here, because it's an international city, and it is the focal point of our government, and to some degree, it's the focal point of our military. So the Pentagon's here. There's military bases here. So you have military personnel coming in, coming out. Their spouses and children are coming in and coming out with them. You have people that are coming in for government jobs, being shipped overseas, X, Y, and Z, whatever, and other people coming up as contractors to support, right? So it's all this. So they ask, where are you from? And then they ask, what do you do? So think about it. When you're on your first date, what are two questions that are always asked to you?
Where are you from and what do you do?
Exactly.
I mean, that's an absolute definite question that's going to come out on a first date.
Right. But if I want to stand out, right? If I want to make an impression on a lady, right? And she's all these other guys, right? I'm talking to, and I'm trying to think of a supermodel here. If I'm talking to Kate Beckinsale, actually she's married, so I can't use her.
Jessica Alba.
Married. Is she married? I think she's
married.
Think.
Oh, you might be right. She might be married. Are there any celebrity? Ariana Grande. She's young, but she's not married.
Okay, so we'll use her, right? So I'm talking to Ariana Grande, right? So all these guys want Ariana Grande. They want her attention, right? And so they're like, hey, where are you from? What do you do? Well, they would know that already because it's her. But anyway, if that's what she looks like, they would say, where are you from? What do you do? Blah, blah, blah. But I got to stand out ahead, shoulders above these guys. And I come up to her and I say, hey, if you had a theme song to your life, what would it be? Instantly, she knows this, right? She's thrown off. She's like, I thought you were going to ask the same questions. You're different. You're asking something different.
Exactly.
And now it's like, and now it doesn't matter we can have a conversation for 10, 15 minutes, walk away and go, man, I don't remember a single thing we talked about, but it was and sometimes I feel like that with this podcast. I go like, what did we, I don't know. And then when I
don't remember what we talk about half the time. I have to listen to them again later. I'm like, man, what were we talking about? Like what, if you had to create a new Starburst flavor, what would it be?
That's
like,
right.
It's just, and here's the thing, I don't want them, none of our topics I feel like are ever random. Like when I say random, I mean, they are random in the sense that
like
we don't know
Starburst
what the topic is going to
random.
be. Well, we never talked about Starburst. That was a random one. That was me throwing something out. But they're never too far away from home of
True.
things that you couldn't do on your own, or, you know, well, maybe not. Maybe not everyone would make a podcast, you know, necessarily. But if you were going to make a podcast, or if you were going to do something creative like make a movie, write a book, write a story, you have to have a title for it. So people have titled things before, and that's essentially what the essence of this particular episode is about. Is that, hey, if you had to come up with another title for this, what would it be? So any topic that we cover is never too far away from home. It's close to home for everyone, and that's one of the things that I think is, you know, special and unique about this. And I'm saying this like we're tooting our own horns. I don't want this to make
That's not what we're trying to do.
I don't want this to come off as sounding like, oh my God, our podcast is like, you know, gold, you know, type of thing. Because it's not like we have like people trying to break down our doors like, we want to meet you guys, sign this.
Can we sponsor you?
Give me your babies.
Yes,
like we don't.
Can we give you your babies?
If you want to sponsor us, sure, but no, I don't want to give you any of my babies.
But we won't put our faces on a T-shirt for you.
We won't put our faces on a
We'll
T-shirt.
put the lower
That's
half
true.
of our
We'll put the
faces.
lower half. If you've ever seen our YouTube channel, for those who don't listen or watch us on YouTube, if you search the show with no name, first off, that won't pop up anything because there's another guy with the same title who has apparently been on YouTube a lot longer, so he's got a few more subscribers and more views and stuff like that. But if you search for channels, or you search the Show with No Name podcast, I'm pretty sure that's how you find our information. You can find these little animations that I put together, which is kind of like the intro portion, if you will, and we show the lower half of our faces. I don't know why I'm telling people this. Now they know that those could have, for all they knew, those could have been just two random dudes' faces.
It's good because some people only listen via the iTunes, via the podcast. So they never go to the YouTube page. And so some of them are like, well, you have a YouTube page.
Well, some people are also vice versa, and they never look at it. And
like,
then
we know this already.
But that being said, I was not saying any of these things to toot our own horn or to say that we are the greatest podcast idea since the history of podcasts, but I definitely think we're one of the more unique podcasts in the history of podcasts. I don't know if I would necessarily go so far as to say that we're perfect for dating advice, but still leads into the question, okay, Brendan, if we had another name, what is the name of our podcast? What would you call our podcast?
Right, so we're summing up what the show is. It's two guys talking about stuff.
Exactly,
right?
Two guys talking about stuff.
One of the names I thought of was alternating topics. But it's
alternating topics.
But we don't alternate. So, because it's not like we go topic A, topic B, topic A, topic B.
That's
topic
true.
We go A, B, C, D, just all the way down. And then,
how about rotating topics?
Yeah, rotating topics would be something like that. But it would have to be something a little catchier. Or the show with no topic.
A merry-go-round of conversation.
Yeah, that's more like a description.
That's true.
I like merry-go-round because you could have conversational merry-go-round or something like that.
That's true.
It's kind of neat. Kind of like that one.
Do you remember some of the first names that we came up with, though? Because we had a few that we were kind of cycling around. Like, we didn't know what would end up becoming the name. And again, we didn't know what our show was going to be about.
So there's only two that I remember. The first one was grave robbing for dummies, and
I don't remember that one at all. I think you're making that up. But go ahead.
Orange tastes like 7. I think
Orange tastes like 7. I don't remember either one of these. I do remember one, and I don't know if you remember it. So for those of you that don't know, and we've kind of mentioned it a little bit, at least I feel like we've mentioned our heritage at least once, each one of our heritage. Brendan is 100% Irish, I think, right? At least mostly.
No, so
maybe like 96%.
I think I'm a quarter Italian.
A quarter Italian.
Irish,
Okay,
Irish Italian / American.
So, but mostly Irish is what I'm saying,
right.
and you're a very proud Irishman.
Yes.
And me on the other side, I'm only half Japanese, but I'm a proud I'm a proud half Japanese man. And so at one point, the name that I came up with, and it wasn't one that was really sticking, but it was just kind of one that we had on there, was corned beef sushi was the name. I don't know if you remember that. But I kind of feel like people would think we're like a food reviewing show or something like that, or a cooking show or something. Which
someone does corned beef. Is that like a new food truck?
That actually sounds like it would be an interesting food truck. Corned beef
sushi. Have to do that sometime. We'll kickstart that.
Well, actually, no. Now that I think that sounds pretty gross. Never mind. Let's not. Let's pretend like that never happened. But we also had another one. What was it?
It was like sticky rice or something like
that.
No.
This was back when we were talking about doing movie reviews.
Like
we had the name of our show was two thumbs down. Because it was the idea of that we were going to talk about movie trailers and essentially rip them apart because they either show too much of the movie or they're not an accurate representation of what the movie actually is, or just movies today in general are pretty terrible and we are we only enjoy certain kinds of movies and not all movies in general. And
by the way, I have not been to the cinema this year. Have you?
Yes, I have. No, and you have too, because you saw the new Star Wars movie, so you can't say
December.
That. But you saw it in December?
Yeah, when I went down to see you for Christmas.
Oh, that's true. That was in December.
Yeah.
Yes, I have been to the cinema.
To see Star Wars again?
I've seen Star Wars again. I also went to see 13 Hours, which was a Michael Bay film. I think I went one other time to see another movie, but I can't remember.
So what I'm going to have to do, this is my homework.
I went to go see Zootopia as well. That was another one I saw this year.
All right, I never heard of either of those. I'm going to go, when we're done with this, I'm going to go to YouTube, and I'm going to go watch the trailers for 13 Hours in Zootopia. And then I'm going to review them and email you my reviews.
And let me know, like, say, this is my review of these trailers. Does this match up well with the movie? I'll put it to you this way. After seeing both of those movies, which, by the way, this is a weird plug to throw in here, and it's not like I'm going to get anything for this. But if you haven't seen the movie Zootopia, first off, I think you're missing out.
Really?
Because I think it's probably one of the best animated films I've ever seen. Although by the time this episode comes out, it'll probably be out of theaters at that point. But seriously, look at the ratings on that thing. Like, that thing got incredible ratings, and I believe that it's well deserved. It was a great movie, very, very, very well done movie for an animated film. So I would definitely recommend.
Right off the bat here, IMDb gave it 8.4 out of 10. Rotten Tomatoes gives it a 98, and Metacritic gives it a 78. So that's very good.
78 on Metacritic.
Yeah, the 78 is low, but 8.4
that is pretty low.
98.
Yeah. 8.4 and 98. Those Rotten Tomatoes is a tough one to beat too. Rotten Tomatoes usually rips things apart, so I'm kind of surprised that they gave it that nice of a. But anyway, that's kind of getting off where we were going with, which was if we did have a show title, at least the ones that we had from before, Corned Beef Sushi, Two Thumbs Down. We talked about a couple of other ideas, but we really kind of just threw things around. And then it was that one fateful day when we were on the conversation, and you said something like I don't know what we're gonna call it. Maybe we just won't have a name for the show. And I'm like, that's it. The show with no name. This is it. That's the name. The show with no name. We have no name. And I still feel like to this day, that fits perfectly with our, I still think it fits well. I think it fits great. And I don't want to change the name of the show, but for my girlfriend's sake, who doesn't like the name of the show and says that's not a name for the show,
when she wants to produces the show, she can suggest a name change.
Actually, what I told her is I said, well, first off, you have to listen to the show. So if you don't even listen to it, then you can't have a say in the name of the show if you don't even listen to the show. But anyway, that's besides the point. Brendan, I still want to know, do you have any other alternative names for our show?
No, I don't. They're all basically, literally, the show with no name, I think, and like I've talked about, there's no cute kind of tagline thing that we could come up with that would really describe what we do, right?
Two dudes talking?
Like corned beef sushi, right? It's like, well, then people would think we're talking about food, right? Or like, how do we involve our heritages or things that we like?
Sure.
Like swimming soccer freak or something like, what is this about? Yeah, no, it's not going to work.
Two dudes talking? I thought that's not a bad two dudes talking.
Stuff.
I'm pretty sure that's already a podcast name.
That's the thing. It's like, I think it is, and I think it's also a quote unquote genre, even though it's not a genre. It's like two dudes talking, but you'd have to put about stuff at the side.
Two dudes talking about stuff. In parentheses or something, like about stuff?
About stuff has to be in the title.
Okay, no, that's fine. Two dudes talking about stuff.
Because they want to know what you're talking about, right? It's like two dudes talking politics or two dudes talking... And then right, so politics immediately it's like a third rail, right? It'll immediately turn people on or off. And then, well, what side of the aisle are they on, right? And then that will immediately turn people on or off. Or maybe one guy's on one side and the other guy's on another side.
So in lieu of this conversation, I was also thinking on the flip side, what might be terrible names for the show? Not that I had like any particular ones that just like came up in mind, but there was one in particular. I don't know why this is
Grave Robbing for Dummies.
Grave Robbing for Dummies is a completely random one, and I think that's. I honestly don't think that's bad of it. No,
I don't think so either.
I think that could have worked. I think we could have Grave Robbing. I think that fits our. You know what? I think that fits our. We're going to change the name. Next episode.
Twitter address.
Grave Robbing for Dummies. The one that I thought of, like that just came off the top of my head, and this really is just coming off the top of my head, so please don't take it that seriously. But I was thinking Sunbathing Penguin. I thought that might be a good name for it.
That's great.
I don't know why that.
I love that, but my problem with that would be, there would have to be a penguin in the graphic icon sort of thing.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? But then people would think Linux. I'm like, you can't do that.
I don't know. I don't think of Linux when I see penguins. Maybe that's just me. I kind of think of Morgan Freeman because he did the voiceover for the March of the Penguins. Just penguins, Morgan Freeman. That's the first thing that comes to my mind.
These guys talk about Morgan Freeman.
No, but I find it funny that I can't really think of any other names as of right now because there's a game that I actually play quite frequently with one of my band members. We will think of a name of a band, like it's just a random name will come up like Bloody Tarantulas, and we'll say like, okay, so what type of genre would they play? Like we create a whole backstory and like their image and like what kind of music they'd play and everything like that. We do this all the time. I don't know if I could necessarily do it for a podcast, but here is what Sunbathing Penguins would talk about. These would be...
Wait. They're actual sunbathing penguins doing the podcast? Or that's you and me that we're doing.
No, I just mean what
like
the...
Fish. Sunbathe, fish.
No, the only thing I could think about is that if you did have a show called Sunbathing Penguins, I feel like it would be a bunch of climate control... a climate control activist having a conversation like, oh man, the ice caps are melting and these penguins are in bad condition, and
you'd have to hear like the AC on in the background, like
just really loud in the background. These poor penguins. Let me tell you. Speaking of penguins, I have nothing else to say about penguins.
I do have a great. So while you were speaking, I came up with a random name generator, but not a name, right? And so it gave me 10 like web series names, right? And here's one that's perfect. It's perfect for our show. Bite-sized nonsense.
Ooh, that is perfect. A clever title.
Right? Because we got like 30 to 45-minute episodes.
Bite-sized nonsense.
We're not really nonsense like, like radio DJs like, hey, how about those guys?
I think most radio DJs are more like, hey, how about them girls?
Sure.
I think it's the other way around.
Right.
They might be saying guys, but it's most of the time it's the other way around. Here I have, so in my search, I also searched. I wanted to search terrible podcast name. These are literal.
Oh, I love it. These are real names.
These are 3 literal podcast names. I'm not making these up. Terrible podcast.
That's the name of the podcast.
It's called Terrible Podcast. A Terrible Podcast. The Terrible Podcast.
Are they run by the same people?
No, these are different podcasts.
Awful. What are they called? Virginia. Well, we'll be West Virginia. You can't do. That's horrible.
We don't have a name for ours. But if we did, if we had any other names, they probably would be something ridiculous and stupid. And I just don't feel like there's something that necessarily fits our genre very well, except maybe Two Dudes Talking, which has already been done before, and it's a genre. Also, what you mentioned, bite-sized nonsense. That's actually not a bad title. I think I really like that. Now I kind of want to go listen to the podcast just simply because of their name.
That's not their name. It was a generator, a name generator.
Oh, this was a random generator?
Yeah, so it's like get web series random generator. And it came out, bite-sized nonsense.
Bite-sized nonsense. Great. That is
so
a clever title.
A Terrible Podcast, and The Terrible Podcast. I'm going to go give them a review, 1-star review, and go, one word, terrible.
Terrible.
Right?
I have a feeling they would enjoy that. Like, they would feed off of that. They're like, dude, please go give us a 1-star rating. Give us only 1 star. We're terrible.
Do they describe these things like what they talk about? We talk about terrible things in the world. Well, of course your podcast is. Nobody wants to hear that.
I think it's more they're talking about the quality, maybe not necessarily the content. Wow. Which that's another thing. Quality wise, I wouldn't say that we're terrible, but we're definitely not sitting in like multi-million-dollar studios in front of billion-dollar microphones. But we are both very blessed to have, some pretty awesome equipment. And we're also blessed to live in the time that we live in, that we're able to do something like this, that we're able to sit thousands of miles. Well, I don't know if it's thousands, but
you're
hundreds.
1,600 miles away.
It's like 1,600 miles away from each other and talk within a matter of seconds, about just random nonsense like, hey, let's rename our podcast. Anyway, that being said, any final words for this episode? Any final words for our viewers I say viewers as if they're watching. Our listeners, I should say, because this isn't necessarily a viewership so much as it is a listenership, if that's a word.
Go ahead. This episode started a new trend with #grave robbing.
I'm pretty sure people have been doing that since like the 1800s, maybe even no, it's definitely before that. Now that I think about it, because there were people that used to rob out of the pyramids.
That's true.
Which that's technically a grave. So I don't necessarily think that's a new trend. But you might encourage people to start grave robbing again.
Start Instagramming. Hey, I grave.
Hey, and here's I have a suggestion, though. How about if you are a listener to this show and you're able to leave a comment on either our YouTube video or or even a comment into our iTunes account where we do openly take reviews and everything. If you have another name for the show or have something else that you would like to name our show, please send us a copy of what you think this show should be called. Not saying that we're going to change the name. I'm pretty sure we're both pretty content with where we stand, but it would be interesting to hear your suggestions. You can also reach us on Twitter at Texas Waffles. I know that seems a little random, but if you go listen to our first episode, it might make more sense. That being said, Brendan, if you don't have anything else for today, I just wanted to say to our listeners, thank you so much for listening in, and we hope this is a terrible sign-off. We hope that you'll tune in again sometime soon.